Rod J. Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General who appointed the special counsel, made clear that he had confidence in Robert S. Mueller III and that he had seen no evidence of actions that would warrant his removal. Pete Maravich for The New York Times, Washington. Deputy Attorney General Rod J. Rosenstein adamantly defended the character and impartiality of Robert S. Mueller III, the special counsel, as he came head-to-head on Wednesday with an increasingly aggressive campaign by Republicans to discredit the inquiry. The Republicans' effort received a fresh jolt from the release one night earlier of text messages exchanged last year between an FBI agent, Peter Sturzik, and an FBI lawyer, Lisa Page, describing the possibility of an election victory by President Trump as terrifying and saying that Hillary Clinton just has to win. Mr. Mueller removed Mr. Sturzik from the Russia investigation as soon as he learned of the texts, a step that Mr. Rosenstein praised. Nonetheless, Republicans used the messages as fodder to attack the impartiality of Mr. Mueller during an appearance by Mr. Rosenstein before the House Judiciary Committee. "The public trust in this whole thing is gone," said Representative Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, summing up sentiments among his party. "It seems to me there are two things you can do. You can disband the Mueller special prosecutor, and you can do what we've all called for and appoint a second special counsel to look into this." But the swelling campaign to undermine Mr. Mueller's investigation, which has dominated conservative media for days, appeared to have little effect on Mr. Rosenstein, who oversees Mr. Mueller. Mr. Rosenstein said he would only fire Mr. Mueller if he had cause under Justice Department regulations, and he said nothing that has happened so far met that standard. Instead, Mr. Rosenstein mounted a step-by-step defense of Mr. Mueller's conduct. He noted that department rules prevented Mr. Mueller from taking political affiliation into consideration when hiring for career positions, and he distinguished between officials holding political views and making investigative decisions out of bias. He said Mr. Mueller would be careful not to allow the latter. "We recognize we have employees with political opinions, and it's our responsibility to make sure those opinions do not influence their actions," Mr. Rosenstein said after Representative Steve Chabot, Republican of Ohio, read out the names of members of Mr. Mueller's team and political contributions they had made to Democratic causes. "I believe that Director Mueller understands that, and he is running that office appropriately," Mr. Rosenstein added. Asked by Representative Bob Goodlatte, the Virginia Republican who chairs the committee, why he remained satisfied with Mr. Mueller, Mr. Rosenstein replied, "Based upon what I know, I believe Director Mueller is appropriately remaining in his scope and conducting himself appropriately, and in the event there is any credible allegation of misconduct by anybody on his staff, that he is taking appropriate action." Mr. Rosenstein's stance signaled that despite the mounting on Mr. Mueller by Mr. Trump's supporters, the fundamental dynamic surrounding the special counsel had not changed. If Mr. Trump were to try to fire Mr. Mueller based on any developments so far, the president would likely first have to fire or force the resignation of Mr. Rosenstein and then hunt for a replacement willing to carry out his orders, echoing Richard Nixon's so-called Saturday Night Massacre during the Watergate scandal. Republicans repeatedly pressed Mr. Rosenstein to appoint a second special counsel to investigate political partisanship in the department in its handling of the Trump-Russia investigation or in last year's decision not to charge Mrs. Clinton with a crime over her use of a private email server while Secretary of State, an idea that has been promoted heavily by commentators on Fox News and elsewhere in recent days. Mr. Rosenstein said he could not appoint another special counsel without a credible allegation of eventual crime to investigate. The campaign against the special counsel, at the very least, provides a rallying cry for the president's supporters to counter the drumbeat of news about Russian interference in the election and possible links to the Trump campaign. And a move by the Justice Department to show reporters the text messages that are the subject of an ongoing Inspector General's inquiry served to fuel the Republican campaign against Mr. Mueller. Mr. Rosenstein confirmed that, in addition to sending the messages to Congress the night before his testimony, the Justice Department invited reporters to view the messages it had given to lawmakers. That was a rare step, although officials in previous administrations have sometimes done so to avoid selective or misleading leaks from Capitol Hill. On Wednesday, the Deputy Attorney General was pressed by Representative Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, about who authorized the messages release. Mr. Rosenstein said that he had approved the step after consulting with the department's independent Inspector General, Michael Horowitz. His answers left ambiguous any distinction between merely providing them to lawmakers, who would essentially be free to leak them, and making them directly available to the news media. "Our goal, Congressman, is to make sure that it is clear to you and the American people that we are not concealing anything that's embarrassing to the FBI," he said. Ian Pryor, a Justice Department spokesman, said that the texts were released in response to requests from lawmakers and after a review that determined that doing so would be lawful and ethical. The department ensures that its release of information from the department to members of Congress or to the media is consistent with law, including the Privacy Act, he said in a statement. Mr. Mueller, a registered Republican appointed by President George W. Bush to direct the FBI, has long had critics in the most pro-Trump corners of the House and the conservative news media. But in recent weeks, as his investigation has delivered a series of indictments to high-profile associates of the president and evidence that at least two of them are cooperating with the inquiry, those critics have grown louder and in numbers. Moreover, the voices of doubt are no longer confined to the party's far-right wing. They include Republican mainstays like Senators Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Charles E. Grassley of Iowa. Representative Louis Gohmert, Republican of Texas, rattled off a list of high-ranking FBI officials and questioned whether they had political motivations. Pete Maravich for the New York Times, "I was the lone voice in the wilderness, and now I have a robust chorus behind me," said Representative Matt Gaetz, a first-term Florida Republican who has emerged as one of Mr. Trump's most vocal defenders on Capitol Hill. The president's own legal team also appears to be part of the campaign. Jay Sekulow, one of Mr. Trump's outside lawyers for matters related to the Russia investigation, told Axios that mounting evidence warranted the appointment of a second special counsel to look at conflicts of interest in the Justice Department. In an interview, Mr. Sekulow cited a Fox News report that Bruce O'Hare, a senior Justice Department official, had been demoted for not disclosing meetings with officials from Fusion GPS, the investigative firm behind a controversial dossier of opposition research on the Trump campaign. Republicans have repeatedly charged that the FBI may have relied on the dossier to obtain a warrant to secretly monitor Americans. Republicans see further evidence of bias in an email sent by Andrew Weissman, one of Mr. Mueller's top deputies, in January telling the acting Attorney General, Sally Q. Yates, that he was so proud and in awe of her decision not to defend Mr. Trump's travel ban in court. Democrats say the pattern is becoming clear as Mr. Mueller moves closer to Mr. Trump's inner circle. Republicans try to discredit federal law enforcement and undercut the eventual findings of the special counsel. The Republican effort may also be intended to blunt the political repercussions should Mr. Mueller be fired, Democrats say. Representative Gerald Nadler, the Judiciary Committee's senior Democrat, called the new Republican demands wildly dangerous to American institutions. "I understand the instinct to want to give cover to the president," he said. "I am fearful that the majority's effort to turn the tables on the special counsel will get louder and more frantic as the walls continue to close in around the president. Perhaps more portentous is the restive Senate, a less partisan where Mr. Mueller's appointment in May was greeted with relief. Skepticism about the special counsel's investigation is starting to take root there, too. He's got a tough job to do, but it seems he's running far afield," said Senator Richard C. Shelby, a long-serving Republican from Alabama. "Maybe it's part of what he can do, but I thought he was going to investigate the Russian influence in the election, and it seems like he is going after a lot of other places, too." Mr. Graham, who a year ago was a leading Republican voice for a thorough investigation of Russian campaign interference, seems to have shifted his focus as well. "I will be challenging R&Ds on Senate Judiciary Committee to support a special counsel to investigate all things 2016, not just Trump and Russia," he wrote on Twitter. Adam Goldman contributed reporting. A version of this article appears in print on December 14, 2017, on page A17 of the New York edition with the headline "Firm Defense of Mueller as Republicans Attack."